The broadcast of the regular meeting of the Budget Committee will now begin.
Good morning. My name is Lene Palmisano and I'm the chair of the Budget Committee. I'm going to call to order this regular committee meeting for Thursday, October 22nd. Before we proceed, I will note for the record this meeting has remote participation by council members and city staff as authorized under the provisions of Minnesota Open Meeting Law, Section 13D.021 due to the declared state of local public health emergency. At this time, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll. I will note that Councilmember Jenkins has pointed out she will need to be late. Councilmember Johnson is on 2 calls here at the same time, and I know Councilmember Fletcher is having computer issues. But go ahead, clerk, and see who else is here at the moment.
Councilmember Wright.
Here.
Gordon.
Here.
Cunningham. Ellison. Osman. Goodman. Jenkins is absent, I believe. Kano.
Here.
Bender.
Here.
Schrader.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Fletcher. Cunningham. Ellison. Osman.
Here.
Goodman. Fletcher. And Chair Palmisano.
Present.
There are 8 members present.
Thank you. Please let the record reflect we have a quorum. Today we will continue hearing presentations from city departments on our mayor's 2021 recommended budget. On today's agenda, we will start with the city clerk's office, the city coordinator, internal audit, and then the assessor's office. We are scheduled today for this committee to go until 12:30. I don't think it will take that long. We will begin today with the city clerk, Casey Carl, who will present on the Office of the Clerk, the Elections and Voter Services Division, and also the City Council Administrative Budget. Mr. Carl.
Good morning, Madam Chair. My name is Casey Carl. I have the privilege of serving as clerk of the City of Minneapolis. May it please the committee, I'm here as stated to present the mayor's 2021 budget proposals for the City Council and for the Office of City Clerk, which encompasses the Elections and Voter Services Division. Combined, the department's overall budget is proposed to decrease approximately $3.3 million in 2021 compared to the adopted 2020 budget. Almost the entirety of this decrease is tied to cost containment efforts in response to COVID-19. With your permission, Madam Chair, I'd like to begin with City Council. That begins on page 214 under the Operating Departments tab of the budget book, or easier online, of course.
Thank you.
With that, then I'll ask to move to the next slide, please. So here you can see that the entirety of the City Council program is supported by the city's general fund. With these funds proposed in 2021 to total $5 million, that is a decrease, by the way, of about 9.6% compared to the adopted 2020 budget. But this funding does enable the council to fulfill its legislative and representative functions. These include the work of the City Council in partnership with the mayor to enact local legislation and public policies that are designed to protect and to promote the general health, safety, and welfare of the community. As an extension of those legislative duties, the council also oversees the city's administration through its power of the purse, as well as regular program evaluations and audits. Finally, the full council and its individual members represent the interests and the priorities of the city in a number of local, regional, and even national organizations and associations. For example, that would include the League of Minnesota Cities and the National League of Cities. In addition to the 13 council members, this particular program also includes the 26 council aides and the ward budgets, which are primarily used to support community outreach, communications, and constituent service functions. Next slide, please. So of course, as council is aware, fiscal year 2021 presents a number of difficult decisions, which are planned to be addressed through a number of base budget cuts. Next slide. Here you can see the mayor has proposed a reduction in the council program that totals just more than $358,000. This reduction will be taken from the ward budget allocations, which are distributed to all 13 ward offices in 2021. That reduction is equivalent to roughly 7% of the proposed department budget. And again, as stated earlier, the ward budgets are used to support a variety of community outreach, communications, and similar representative functions for council members. So that reduction will, of course, curtail some of that work next year. However, council has the ability to roll over year-end savings from their ward budgets in the current fiscal year, so that does have the effect of potentially mitigating against some of those reductions in some cases. The mayor has not proposed any reduction to the base budget for the council program, so there are no proposed reductions in staffing or funding for core operations. Next slide, please. That concludes my prepared comments for the council's budget program, Madam Chair. I'm happy to respond to questions about that particular budget. Otherwise, I'm happy to proceed to present the mayor's recommended budget for the Office of City Clerk.
Thank you. We'll just pause here briefly to see if anyone has questions about our own council office's budget. I do want to note that we've been joined by Councilmember Cunningham and Goodman. Are there any questions about our city council level budgets? Seeing none, go ahead, Mr. Clerk. Thank you.
Thank you. So next I will present the mayor's 2021 proposed budget for the Office of City Clerk. The details for City Clerk begin on page 203 under the Operating Departments tab in the budget book or online. The Office of City Clerk encompasses 3 primary business lines. Those include the Elections and Voter Services Division, the Records and Information Management Division, and Legislative Support and Administration. The Elections and Voter Services Division is accounted for separately, so this portion of my presentation will focus on those last 2 business lines, Records and Information Management and Legislative Support and Administration. The Office of Clerk is the primary record-keeping agency of the city government. It fulfills that responsibility in 2 ways. First, as clerk and parliamentarian of the City Council, that work involves facilitating the city's legislative processes, as well as the publication and preservation of the city's charter, its code of ordinances, and other official acts. And secondly, as the custodian of the city's information assets, including its archival collections and the city seal. This work includes the statutory duties that are prescribed as the city's responsible authority and the data compliance official. From a budgetary perspective, the clerk's office represents roughly $5.9 million in 2021 as proposed, and that's an increase of 6.6% compared to the adopted 2020 budget. As shown on this slide, about 3/4 of the office's budget is from the city's general fund. The remaining 1/4, shown in orange on the fund distribution piece, that is from internal service charges, and that funds the operations of our Document Solution Center. The Document Solution Center, as you know, is a unit within our Records and Information Management Division. It functions as the city's in-house printer and document resource center. Next slide, please. Again, the next part is reviewing cuts that have been recommended by the mayor, so we'll move to the next slide. Beginning with the Records and Information Management Division, as shown here, the mayor has not proposed a reduction to this particular division's funding. I believe council is aware of the challenges that this unit in particular has experienced as it functions as the focal point for the entire enterprise in terms of receiving, routing, reviewing, and ultimately releasing data in response to public requests. As part of the 2020 amended budget process, the council and mayor authorized the transfer of 2 full-time positions from the Records Information Unit in the Police Department to the Clerk's Records and Information Management Division. This means that going forward, the clerk's office will be the singular access point for requests for public data requests. That transfer, of course, naturally will increase the operating budget for this particular division. I would like to note, Madam Chair, with the committee's indulgence, the significant assistance that's been provided to me and to my team in that transition process by Mary Zenzen, who is the manager of the Police Records and Information Management Unit. Ms. Zenzen has been and she remains a strong ally to us in terms of ensuring that public data is available in response to requests, and her continued support is going to be critical to the future improvements and success that we make working with the police department and across the enterprise. I also would like to extend my appreciation to Deputy City Attorney Eric Nilsson, who during his term as acting city attorney took on the lead work in facilitating that transfer between the police department and the clerk's office, because he recognized it was for the better service not only of the city enterprise, but for the community as well. Next slide, please. This slide shows that the mayor has proposed a reduction of more than $172,000 for the Legislative Support and Administration Division. The details of that proposed reduction are included on the slide. Essentially, we are proposing to leave unfilled the existing but vacant operations technician position. The remainder of that reduction then would consist of cuts to the department's supplies, equipment, membership and dues for professional associations and professional certifications, and transportation-related expenses. In the current fiscal year, the office was able to successfully overcome that position vacancy through the reallocation of personnel from the convention center. And I also would like, with the committee's indulgence, to express my thanks to the convention center's executive director, Jeff Johnson, for his willingness to reassign staff to help with other enterprise demands. Ted Arbiter, who in normal times and under normal circumstances is the Convention Center's Technology Services Coordinator, has been working with our office. And through that work, that reassignment, we've been able to leverage his expertise to transition the city to these online digital formats for council and committee meetings, public hearings, and public events. Ted has partnered the past few months with our own technology manager, Grant Johnson, in the clerk's office to support those online meetings, both for the council as well as the numerous boards and commissions within the city enterprise, also to help post, maintain, and update content on our website so that we can keep the community informed, and has done a host of other tasks as well that vary widely from day to day. So my great thanks to Ted Arbiter, who's also, of course, managing this meeting as part of our technical team, and to Jeff Johnson for sharing his resources with us. Next slide, please. So given the stark fiscal realities that face the city, it's certainly noteworthy to discuss investments that the mayor has proposed in his 2021 budget. Next slide, please. As stated, the Clerk's Records and Information Management Division has really worked this past year to expand its role in terms of centralizing the intake, internal management, review, and redaction of data in response to public requests. In 2020, we piloted a contract, a master contract for professional services to enhance our in-house capacity to conduct the necessary legal reviews and legal redactions before releasing responsive data in response to requests. We had requested to continue that master contract in 2021, and the mayor has included that in his recommended budget. And again, to emphasize, it's rare to speak about investments, certainly in the current environment, so we are very grateful for this added level of support in addition to the 2 FTEs that were transferred this year. It's my belief that those investments actually help improve the operation of the entire city enterprise, and through it, improve service to the community. We recognize that every dollar, every penny is critical, especially now, so we are very grateful to the mayor for including this investment in our records division for the proposed 2021 budget. Next slide, please. That concludes my comments on the Office of City Clerk budget proposal for 2021. I'm happy to stand for questions or proceed to the Elections and Voter Services Division.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. I will pause briefly to see if there's any questions or comments from my colleagues. I'm not seeing any. Mr. Carl, it's not that we're not interested. You're doing a great job explaining everything very thoroughly. Go ahead with the elections.
Sure. So it's my pleasure then to present the mayor's recommended budget for elections and voter services in 2021. This is also found in the clerk section starting on page 203 in the budget book. We'll move to the next slide. So as you can see here, the Elections and Voter Services Division is entirely funded through the general fund of the city. In short, the Elections and Voter Services Division is responsible for discharging all of the city clerk's duties as the chief elections official for the city. First, that maintains a readiness to conduct an election whenever required. Second, it means preserving the integrity of each election by planning, organizing, and coordinating all of our administrative operations for elections. And then third, and most importantly, it means that we ensure all voters have equitable, free, and fair access to the ballot box and are supported in the process of participating in an election. From a budgetary perspective, the Elections Division represents about $3.2 million in the 2021 budget. That's a decrease of almost 50% from the current 2020 year budget. And that's because we had a one-time allocation in the current fiscal year of almost $4 million to handle multiple elections we've conducted. To remind council members, we started the year with a special election. In total, we've had the presidential nomination primary. We had special elections for the House 60A vacancy and the Ward 6 vacancy. We had the 2020 statewide primary, and now, of course, the 2020 presidential general election. So to say that 2020 has been the year of elections is definitely an understatement. As shown on this slide, then, I said this is entirely funded through the general fund, a significant reduction going into 2021. Next slide. As before, discussing base cuts is the next piece of this presentation, so we'll move to the next slide. And happily, other than eliminating the almost $4 million in one-time supplemental funding in 2020, the mayor has not proposed further reductions to the elections-based budget in 2021. As council members know, next year is, of course, the municipal election, so that will be the city's fourth experience using ranked choice voting. And we have been working over the past several years to work on process improvements that we're excited to bring forward and share with council early next year after we're done with this year's series of elections. So next slide, please. That concludes my presentation of the elections division proposal or proposed budget. It also concludes my presentation of the entire department budget. I am happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. I'll mention we have been joined by Councilmember Ellison, and I'll call on Council President Bender for questions or comments she might have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know we have a lot to cover in these, and but did just want to make a comment about the City Council budget. I know that this year in this budget environment that all departments are seeing cuts, and understand why this one was proposed. I do just want to note that the clerk and I have been talking, as I think many of you know, with you and each other about how the council is staffed, and some questions about how the Minneapolis City Council is staffed versus other city councils from similar cities, and just kind of needing to have a conversation about sort of the way that our city enterprise staffs initiatives that the City Council initiates. So if a city council member wants to have a press conference or make a press statement, all of that is currently covered by our own two aides and ourselves. If the city council wants to initiate an ordinance or write a new policy, we rely on department staff who have subject matter expertise in those areas, which requires us to keep having conversations about how we're prioritizing work. And in many other cities, city councils have their own legislative staff, their own communications staff, their own research staff to help support the legislative functions of the body and all of the communications needs that go along with that. And so, like I said, I'm now talking longer than I even expected to. I do think it's worth continuing to follow up. I've been thinking that once the election is over, it would be helpful to have the clerk come and give that presentation publicly about the analysis that he shared with us last year when we were talking about staff salaries for our staff, since they are covering so many of these functions themselves. And then so last budget we really focused on the salaries for our two aides. I had intended for us to build on that with some more conversations, and then of course now our budget is in a very different situation. But I do think as we look to next term and beyond, it is worth thinking about and having a transparent and clear conversation about how the City Council is staffed, how we want it to be staffed, and what that means for our interactions with city departments versus other legislative bodies around the country. So a long comment, and I think a note that I'll follow up with Council Vice President, the chair of the POGO committee, and the clerk to see about scheduling something for after they are finished administering this amazing election that they're all working on so hard. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else have any questions or comments for our city clerk? I'm not seeing any. Mr. Carl, as this budget evidence makes evident, your job is many and varied, and we appreciate all of the hard work that you and your whole team, all of your different teams, are doing to support us, whether it's through a big, quick transition home and supporting the efforts where we can all still connect safely, or with our boards and commissions, or with elections. You've just done an amazing job, thanks in part to your leadership and also all of your staff. So thank you very much for all of your efforts.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
We're going to transition now. I will note that Councilmember Fletcher is officially on. He was on before, but then had to restart his computer. So let's see, next up we have the City Coordinator and the IGR Department, Intergovernmental Relations. I will invite our City Coordinator, Mark Ruff, to go ahead and begin those presentations when he's ready. Welcome, Mr. Ruff.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Council. I'm Mark Ruff, the City Coordinator. I will be giving the presentation, but we also have with us a number of the program managers and those in the coordinator's office who are very well equipped to answer any specific questions that you have. It's a very talented staff of people, and I'm honored to serve as the City Coordinator, both for the office and then also for the other departments that you will be hearing from, which also has a list of both new leaders and very talented leaders, and excited to have Fatima Moore give her first budget overview here as the IGR Director for the City of Minneapolis. I will walk through just the City Coordinator's department, the office department in the budget presentation at this time. If I could have the next slide. So our department is primarily funded through the general fund, but we do have both foundation and federal grant support in the smaller portions of the pie. I will say that you will see an amendment come forward on our budget later on. That's a technical amendment, but we have good news that we did receive an extension of the Kresge was not available, that confirmation was not available at the time the budget book was published, and I think Chair Palmisano made you aware that this modification would be coming forward. It's good news because it will be continuing then employment for 2 of our grant-funded positions into 2021 that we were very concerned about, and will provide additional services around arts and the creative economy into 2021. On the expenditure side, you can see that we have 2 overall functions that predominantly are part of the city's outreach, the City Coordinator's Department outreach, one being the strategic management efforts and the other being the efforts around strategic initiatives. These are led by Andrea Larson and Danielle Shelton-Wolznak, who are also on the call for any specific questions. And then administration, which is Trudy Genstead, and also our efforts around the new public service area, or what we are calling the service center in the new public service building. Next slide. Next slide, if we could. On the base cuts, there are several changes to the City Coordinator's budget this year that are both involving cuts and additions, and I will walk through them in pieces and then try to summarize them in whole. We do have 1 vacant position within the administration area that we will be leaving vacant, and we also will be discontinuing some of the funding and strategic partnerships, specifically around the Downtown Council. The Downtown Council historically has seen $400,000 of support from the general fund. That request for 2021, given COVID limitations from the Downtown Council, was $200,000, and the mayor's recommended budget has moving that support over to Meet Minneapolis out of that contract. So you will be seeing an action coming forward on a modification of that contract to the council specifically. And we also had $100,000 of funding for large events in the coordinator's office. That is also a cut. Next slide. Within strategic initiatives, specifically in sustainability, we did have funding that was utilized for energy efficiency, primarily solar projects, and we had been funding, for example, on the new building, solar panels, PV panels on the building, and that was paid. And so we have attempted in the budget to replace that PV funding, the photovoltaic funding, with potential net debt bond support for that. That is a substantial amount above and beyond what is this cut. This is a one-time reduction in sustainability for 2021. And we also have one vacant position that we anticipate leaving open right now. That was a relatively new position that was around engagement. Next slide. As I mentioned, the public service area, or we're calling the service center, does have staffing and also some other support. We were able to reduce that support for 2021 by $50,000, but still be prepared as that building opens and the service is being prepared and fully staffed for that going into 2021 and into 2022 as we anticipate, as much as we can say, normalcy around activities, but we are very excited about that public service enhancement for the city. Next slide.
Thank you. If I can just pause, Councilmember Schrader, who has a question or comment.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. Yeah, my question was on 2 slides back on the PV funding. Mr. Ruff, just a question. You had talked about replacing the cut with some bonds. So I've got 2 questions. Like, one, first and foremost, is when you say city buildings, is this in any way tied to the new building, or is this something that we're adding solar capacity to existing buildings, and would this be something that can be pushed off until we have a better idea of funding? And then 2, what are the chances of getting those bonds?
Madam Chair, Council Member Schrader, specifically we have paid the capital costs of the photovoltaic cells for the new building with this funding through 2020. So that's fully paid for in the capital budget. We have other existing city buildings that we have been looking at adding solar capacity to, that potentially this could be utilized, but had been not earmarked for a specific building. In the city's capital budget, in a separate place, was a request, and you will be seeing the capital budget later in the budget process, for net debt bonds that could be utilized in a larger dollar amount so we can jumpstart those efforts. There are buildings that such as the new property and evidence building, which was designed and had supports built into it during the renovation to support PV panels. And so I think those questions about the specific amounts and what the uses would be, I would ask to defer to the capital budget. Just don't want to speak about the exact dollar amounts because I know that haven't been finalized in the capital budget yet.
Thank you. That answers my questions.
Councilmember Cano.
Thank you. Oh, geez, my mute button is so sticky. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Coordinator, could you please refresh my memory? I know we're doing extensive work to strengthen the arts within the city, stabilize that programming, trying to explore ways that it can have a long-standing legacy within the city instead of being cut every year or changed depending on whatever whims the city council might have. So in that strategic planning conversation, which has been going on for 1.5 years now or so, the plan was to make the 2 Kresge granted positions move into the general operating fund for stability purposes. Is that happening or not?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cano, under the mayor's proposed budget, those 2 positions would not be put onto the general fund at this time. But as I mentioned, the Kresge Foundation has extended for at least through the first 3 quarters of 2021, the grant funding to support those 2 positions. And we're hopeful that that extension will be all the way through the end of 2021, but we don't have firm confirmation of that. But those 2 positions are not at this time in the general fund portion of the proposed budget.
And just one final question. How much money would that be for those 2 staff positions that are currently there?
Madam Chair, we could certainly refer back to Mr. Intermill. I would say that number is, depending on overhead costs, somewhere in the $200,000 to $225,000 range, but certainly would defer to the budget staff.
Thank you.
That sounds about right, Mr. Coordinator, from my emails with Danielle. Director Intermill, did you have anything to add to that?
I concur with Mr. Ruff.
Okay. I'll note the capital budget should be posted later today or tomorrow, and the presentation on it is next Thursday. Also wanted to mention that Councilmember Jenkins has joined us. I'm not seeing any further questions, so go ahead and continue, Mr. Ruff.
Thank you. Next slide, new investments. There were a substantial number of positions within the city coordinator's office which were previously grant funded, and as Councilmember Kano highlighted, we were not able to fund all of those through the mayor's recommended budget, but there are this is a substantial investment in the enterprise, and specifically around key programs that are strategically important to not just the department, but strategically to the council and the mayor. Those include 3 full-time equivalents in Division of Race Equity, 1 full-time position within human trafficking, and 1 full-time within resilience. So these are 5 grant-funded positions which are now given the stability of ongoing general fund funding, and that is a total dollar amount of $375,000. Next slide. Also on an ongoing, on a strategic partnership side, we have $245,000 that include the following partnerships listed there, which most of which have been funded in the past in varying amounts. That includes Kajug, the Lopet Foundation, Cedar Riverside, Midtown Community Works, the Downtown Improvement District Homeless Response Storage Program, and Greater MSP. That is a total amount this year of $245,000. Certainly can go through more detail if there are questions for each of those programs. Next slide.
Mr. Ruff, I'm going to pause to invite Councilmember Bender to provide some comments. I think it was about the previous slide topic.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I mentioned this a few meetings back. I can't remember exactly where, but I shared this summary of FTE staffing across the enterprise since the last recession through now. And the coordinator's office has seen a very large expansion of staff in that time. And I think focused in particular priorities of the city, like race equity or sustainability. But I'm just wondering if you could talk more now or at some point before the budget is adopted about how you're prioritizing this work and the sort of focus area of the staff that are in the new divisions and new initiatives, and then how that's interacting with the staff in the departments that are working on, you know, housing or transportation or specific subject matter areas that also, of course, have a lot to do with race equity and sustainability and all those goals. Thanks. Not a small question, I know.
And Chair Palmisano, Council President Bender, would you like me to highlight briefly that? And then I heard you also invite a longer discussion, maybe at a POGO committee or some other venue, if that's your choice. So just
that sounds great. Maybe now it's the pitch for why should all these staff be in the coordinator's office? I'll just ask it bluntly like that.
Yeah.
In a friendly way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a question that we all have witnessed, and as you're all aware, I've been the coordinator since April, and so this has been a topic of discussion, certainly for Danielle and Andrea and I on several occasions. And I think that it's not enough to say that for the coordinator's office, it's simply an incubator for programs which then should move along to some other place. I think philosophically, and I'll just speak for me personally, that we do have oftentimes trouble within the enterprise on how do we pull initiatives that are cross-departmental, and that is the role of the coordinator. And I think that's not to criticize our departments whatsoever, because we certainly have taken some steps, and an example of that this year was moving a coordinator position in sustainability to the health department that was around food policy, and that alignment made a lot of sense. And that program had been within the coordinator's office for a number of years. But there are these major shifts, and the shifts, especially around racial equity, which within SREAP that the council and the mayor decided at the beginning of your term was a top issue, and just within the last several months has become even a larger issue. If we want to see more rapid change and more uniform change across the enterprise, I think the coordinator's office is a place that can accomplish that. And I think very highly about Joy Mar Stevens and the work that she's been doing in the Division of Race and Equity, and working in partnership with many of you on an individual basis as we form, and I would mean this intentionally, we are still forming what is changing that initiative into action really mean. And what does that mean both internally and externally? I would also say around climate change that sustainability has also undertaken that effort. And so I think one of the questions that we all have to address, and I need to address with you in more specifics, is how much of that work should be more focused internally towards supporting departments, and how much of that work should be focused really more externally on creating change. And I think that the answer is clearly both, but we should be always talking about where is the shift in that focus and where are the resources in terms of those efforts, where should those really change over time. But I would say that the last thing that we have been working with in terms of overall policy is, I know, an invitation from many of you elected officials and the mayor in terms of talking about restructuring efforts once we get through the budget process and what recommendations we may have. And I certainly will be bringing some options for you all to think about, but and within restructuring, none of it's going to be life-changing, but it is going to be a little clearer focus in terms of the efforts that we have within those, in terms of how those turns into actions. So it's a fair question. I'm happy to address it more in detail when we get closer to that restructuring discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Ruff. I'm not seeing any other questions.
So next slide then after, oh, I'm sorry, energy and climate programming. As I think I was starting to say that positive investment about this is that this had previously been one-time money and is now ongoing money within the budget up to $250,000. So this is a new investment within the mayor's office, or within the mayor's recommended budget for the coordinator's office. And those are broad uses that can be prioritized within the council initiatives. Next slide. There is one-time money in the mayor's recommended budget that is focused on some of the work that we just discussed around transformational racial healing work. Part of this money is related to the action that the council took recently on the Truth and Reconciliation resolution that was brought forth by Council Vice President, and a substantial portion of this money will be utilized specifically on moving that process along. And then also within the area around 38th and Chicago, and not just physical improvements, but other types of efforts as that situation. And when I use the term situation, it's really right now, how do we transform that intersection that is in alignment with not just the recent events, but the areas that Council Vice President has been working on 38th Avenue Thrive, and some of the longer-term community development efforts that are around 38th and Chicago specifically. So $300,000 for that line item. Next slide. Also had been previously one-time money, which is now ongoing, which is one of the programs that I've been very, very impressed with in the time that I've been in the city coordinator's office and in the city generally, and that's the Trans Equity Summit, and just the important work that our staff does to support that. And when I say our staff, it's not just within the coordinator's office, but across the enterprise. Next slide. So that, as I said, a fair amount of movement up and down. The next slide will show just a summary of what that net change means within the department. So CSL, again, the middle column is current service level for those watching that aren't familiar with that terminology. So that was what would have been expected for the 2021 budget in our forecast originally, and then the reductions or additions within each of the personnel or non-personnel line items, and then the total change overall, which is still a reduction even with that additional support for the grant-funded programs and the sustainability and race and equity issues that we described previously. With that, Madam Chair, it does conclude our presentation. Happy to stand for any additional questions or pass it off to our staff for specific inquiries.
Thank you. I'll just pause briefly to see if my colleagues have any questions or comments. I'm not seeing any. Thank you for this presentation. I'm going to ask that we transition. Next up will be the Department of Internal Audit. I'll invite Brian Patrick, our Interim Director of Internal Audit, to give that presentation as he's ready. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Ruff, are you? Yep, there we go. Mr. Ruff, did you have more that you wanted to talk about with IGR or?
Yes.
I did not at this time, Madam Chair. No.
Okay. Thank you.
We do have Fatima Moore, who is online for the full IGR budget presentation, but I defer to you in terms of the order on how you want to take those presentations.
Yeah, I think we will go to IGR next. Sorry about that. Welcome, Fatima. Director Moore.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Fatima Moore, and I'm honored to serve as the Director of the Intergovernmental Relations Department. I will be presenting the Mayor's recommendation 2021 budget for IGR specifically today. And next slide, please. Thank you. The Mayor's 2021 recommended budget for IGR is $1.21 million, so roughly 9% below the 2020 adopted budget. All of IGR's funding does come from the general fund budget. And I just wanted to provide a little brief overview on the difference in our budget, this proposed budget, based on changes that happen within our department. The proposed 2021 budget does not include special revenue funds, and that may look different because the special revenue fund, which supported the grants department within IGR, was transferred to the finance department, and that was done earlier this year. So because the grants department has moved over to the finance, the one program under IGR is essentially the intergovernmental relations work that we do. I think it'll be important to note that the program does include 4 core functions, though. Our four core functions under IGR currently are federal government relations, state government relations, regional relations and partnerships, and then enterprise support as well. So based on that change, IGR is essentially for performing these four functions since the grants moved over to the finance department. Next slide, please. Thank you. Our base cuts currently, overall, again, that 9% base cut. The proposed budget maintains IGR's current staffing capacity of 5. We currently have a vacancy that was created by the retirement of the previous director. And the 2021 budget does assume that that vacancy will be filled. Next slide, please. Regarding some savings under personnel, so although you see a 0% change, the previous director was paid at the highest salary cap. And as knowledge of the director was going to be retiring, there was a reclassification that happened. And so there is some savings that's translated into that salary reclassification that impacts and did not necessitate an actual cut within IGR's personnel based on that savings due to the reclassification of the program. So that was an offset there. The 4% change under the allocation line, those are for fleet services, IT, rent, and those change depending on costs that are really out of the control of our department and come from the finance department. Next slide, please. IGR base cuts here as well. We have some impacts to our non-personnel costs that translate into a reduction in contractual services for our federal and state lobbying. The reduction scenario would impact our city lobbying efforts, both at the state and federal level. And since the federal contract would partially be retained at a lower amount, the city and our team is certainly looking at how do we more strategically utilize our lobbying contract and then enhance additional relationships with congressional delegation members. The department plans to enhance its outreach with the delegation, both at the federal and state level, including national organizations, through multiple means like staff call-ins, additional coalition building, and other means of communication and outreach that utilize communities, city, state, and national partnerships. In addition, due to the reduction in state lobbying services, IGS staff would not be able to leverage the same number of lobbyists as it has had in previous years, and will instead absorb additional functions. However, we do have plans in mind to, in that vein as well, enhance collaboration with community partners and some of our other networks. And the reduction in non-personnel that would be gained from cuts in printing, office supplies, publications, limited training opportunities, and memberships are ways that we also intend to utilize a lot of in-service opportunities rather than going outside for some of those other contractual services. Next slide, please.
Ms. Moore, Councilmember Schrader has a question or comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Moore, sure. Just wanted to, thank you for this, because I think it is going to be, it's difficult with this budget to have the same impact. But I did want to flag that as, the federal government and state government talk about any relief for COVID coming forward, it'd be helpful to know if we need more help on that front. And so it just as big bills start going through, if that is something that we need to look at and what the real cost of adding capacity would be, I think being able to flag that for council would be really helpful.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Schrader, thank you. I'll make note of that. Madam Chair, that was the end of my budget presentation. Really brief, and I'll stand for any questions that you and your colleagues have.
Thank you, Fatima. I will call on Councilmember Bender.
Thank you. I just wanted to quickly chime in that I'm so excited for your leadership here, Dr. Moore, and we've been really talking about how the IGR and our legislative agenda fits in with our city's policy work. So we have a legislative agenda for the state legislature, but we don't have a legislative agenda adopted in the same way for the city council. And I think there's so much more we could do to help communicate with ourselves and with our staff, department staff, and the public about how all of this is on a continuum, for any particular issue or problem that's facing our community, whether it be housing or infrastructure investment, economic development, small business support, public safety. What are the issues and priorities that we're focused on, and what are we doing at the city to address those issues, to take on those problems, and then how does our external relationships or advocacy to other government entities fit into that? And so I'm just so excited about Dr. Moore's leadership in this, some exciting ways that I think we can better integrate our city policy work and our external legislative agenda, and had some really amazing conversations with her and the other department heads about this recently. So I guess I just want to say thank you, and I'm really excited about all that I think you could do with this very small but mighty staff, and really to kind of bring forward a more integrated approach to policy development and advocacy on behalf of our constituents.
Madam Chair, Council President Bender, thank you for that. And you definitely captured how I often talk about myself and the rest of my colleagues, which is that we are small but very powerful, and really look at leveraging the budget that we have and being as effective as possible, both in alignment to the City Council's goals, the mayor's goals, and our collective city as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions or concerns, I will thank you for this presentation and say that next up is our Department of Internal Audit as we work to transition to Mr. Patrick. Mr. Patrick, are you there?
I am.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Council. My name is Ryan Patrick. I'm the Interim Internal Audit Director. It's been a pleasure to serve in this role since February, and I'll be discussing how internal audit will leverage our 2021 budget to add value to the city. If we can go to the next slide. The entirety of our $751,000 proposed budget would come from the general fund, and it would be distributed to our one program, and that is our audit function. You can move to the next slide. Next, I'll talk about the base cuts and how we will use our budget. You can move to the next slide. So our base cuts that are proposed amount to about $28,000. They won't impact our personnel. They're going to specifically come from our non-personnel budget, our specialty contractor usage. So to do so, we will have to reduce our spending with specialty contractors. These services are pretty critical. There are a lot of, as internal audit serves the entire city, representing one of the third lines of defense when the city's experiencing risks. We need to use specialty contractors to address issues that the team just simply doesn't have the expertise to do. I'll give a couple of examples. The most kind of prominent example and one of the most critical projects we'll be working on next year would be IT auditing. IT auditors have a specific background in IT, and in doing their analysis and audit work, they know the ins and outs of IT systems and can provide a much higher level of service in that regards than a general auditor who's used to working with city departments. The past year has brought about unprecedented changes in the way the IT services function for the city. With all the remote work, with a myriad cyber attacks going on, it's really critical that internal audit provide significant coverage to IT. We can assess risk, we are able to identify gaps in coverage, and provide possible solutions to remediate some of those risks to the city. That's the primary usage we will, the primary thing we will do with our budget next year is provide that comprehensive coverage to IT auditing, but also we have a number of other projects that are really important to do. It's very hard to quantify the benefits that internal audit might provide to the city. When we identify significant gaps, when we provide proposed solutions to those gaps, and when risks are addressed, we could potentially prevent a massive problem. And it's hard to quantify, again, how those avoided risks or avoided issues save the city money and save the city's reputation and prevent harm. But it's a very important function, and that's why we do have an internal audit department. Like the last presenter discussed, we are a small team. There's 4 of us, but we do add a lot of value to the city, and I'm happy to discuss any of this further and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. I'm not currently seeing any questions or comments. I will say on behalf of myself as the chair of the audit committee that it's very true. It is hard to calculate risk that's already been mitigated, but I certainly appreciate all the different kinds of work that our audit team has taken on. There's so many, it's a target-rich environment always, right? But not only do I appreciate the hard work that you're doing, but also the way that you collaborate and work together with departments and their leaders. You regularly receive positive feedback from the different parts of our city you work with, that it has been truly helpful and provides value to them as a department to be more effective in serving residents in our city. So thank you for that. I'm again not seeing any questions, so I'll thank you for your presentation, and we'll look to transition to our city assessor's office. Our city assessor is Mr. Patrick Todd. Mr. Todd, are you here?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, my name is Patrick Todd, and committee member. My name is Patrick Todd, and it's an honor to serve as the Minneapolis City Assessor. Joining me on this call is Rebecca Malmquist. She is the director of the department and someone who I relied upon heavily in the development of this budget and whose opinion I respect. My budget can be found on the mayor's budget book, or in the mayor's budget book, on page 187. Next slide. On this summary chart, the assessor's office is a single-sourced funded department, and that is the general fund. And while technically you only have one program, our budget is used for property inspections, data and record management of the 130,000 Minneapolis properties, tax exemptions, tax relief programs, and as well as the disaster relief program we actually went through just recently because of the civil unrest. We had to go out and re-inspect about 1,100 properties because of the civil unrest, and we're fortunate that the state will now be doing reimbursements of many of those properties. We'll have a recalculated property tax statement, and so we have through this effort we are providing property tax relief to many of the property owners that had some significant damage to their property. So with our funding, we also do mailings, which is the value and classification notices. We also have the truth and taxation notices, which will be coming out or hitting the mail in about 3 weeks. We have neighborhood and business relations, and we also do taxpayer education and engagement. Next slide, please. And one more. Perfect. In the mayor's proposed 2021 budget, we see a $594,118,000 budget cut, which is about a 9.6 budget reduction. The budget cut will impact all 3 personnel, non-personnel, and allocated funds. From a personnel impact, the appraisal supervisor position will not be filled, and an assessor 2 position will not be filled. These positions only became vacant because staff took promotional opportunities outside the city. As a general rule, we never leave positions vacant. We just don't have the staff capacity to leave these positions vacant. You know, these times when we're taking these budgetary cuts, the impact on staff reduction comes at a time when the economic damage due to the pandemic is having a significant impact on business as well as real estate. We'll have a sudden and significant impact on property values. We're looking at significant increases in property tax appeals, taxpayer appeals, litigation, and levy retention. In my opinion, you know, what we're experiencing today in the 2021 and 2022 is going to be similar to, I'd say, the roller coaster ride that we went through in the 2008, 2009, and 2010 foreclosure crisis. That was the last crisis that we went through, and as a result of that crisis, we saw tax court appeals increase 67% from around 1,400 tax court cases, tax court appeals to 2,300. We saw a levy loss from about $1 million to $5 million in tax court litigation. We also saw tax court appeals, or taxpayer appeals, increase around 200%. So looking on our horizon, it's getting to be difficult to continue to do the great work that my staff are doing, especially during these challenging times. And while we always put our best foot forward to make sure that we meet all the statutory requirements, looking ahead and looking at the likelihood of all these increases in litigation and appeals, it might be a challenge for us to continue to do the good work that we're doing. We would expect to see some of the increases in these as well. I will take the next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you go back up one more? Thank you. When we're talking about the non-personnel impacts, we're talking about a budget cut to our CAMA project. So in 2020, we had to cut the CAMA project. Even though we had kicked it off, the dollars were better used elsewhere in the city. So we lost about $2 million of capital dollars to fund our new CAMA project. And as a result, we did have dollars in the 2021 budget for ongoing maintenance. So to achieve our budget cut, we have cut the ongoing maintenance fund for the capital CAMA project. With no CAMA project, obviously it doesn't make sense to have a maintenance fee. The new CAMA system was capable of being more laser and more precise with values. It was also going to be able to be more transparent, a more transparent process with taxpayers, both of which were important to us. We were hoping to be able to move the dial on equity, having more values or having more accurate values, as well as having a process that was easier understood. So by not having this CAMA project, we feel like we're going backwards on being more transparent and being as accurate as we possibly can. But that is the decision that we're in, or the situation we're in today. We also feel like in my department that we are walking a tightrope. Right at this point in time, we have the CAMA system we're currently using is 20 years old. As long as we can maintain walking on that tightrope, we're fine. But if we fall, there is no net. This is something that probably keeps me up at night, and I know it keeps Rebecca, my director, up at night. When we think about if this system fails, there is no backup system whatsoever. Even the vendor does not support our current system anymore because of how old it is. Lastly, we talk about the cuts to professional services, the allocation. These were funds that we were using for staff and team coaching. We use these for appraisal and litigation consultants, or we use them for mass appraisal analytics and validations. So with that, we were able to achieve our $594,000 budget cut for the proposed 2021 budget. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Todd. I'm not seeing any questions, but I do want to say this is really disappointing to see things like an investment in this new system, the CAMA system that we've spoken about at length, and predominantly the previous Ward 6 Councilmember Warsami was pretty instrumental in helping to initially get that system funded. It is a big equity measure in our city, and that despite the best that we can do is to be as accurate as possible in all of the different value assessments of different property in our city. And when they are off value, we don't have fair or equal distribution of people that challenge that. And that does, yes, create some extra work for the assessor's office, but it's important work to do. So this CAMA system would have assisted that and given people a lot of additional transparency, as you mentioned, about how we value properties across our city. I'm not I'm not seeing any additional comments or questions, but thank you, Mr. Todd, for your very candid level of detail about the risks involved. And thank you for this presentation.
Thank you.
Colleagues, seeing no further discussion at this point, I'm going to direct the clerk to please file all of the presentations from this morning. So that would be the city coordinator's office, the city clerk's office, internal audit, and our city assessor. I'll note that our next budget committee meetings are scheduled for next Thursday, October 29th, in 2 sessions. So at 10 a.m. the morning session and at 1:30 p.m. is the afternoon session. That day we're set to hear from Regulatory Services, Public Works, Capital and Debt Service, our Park Board, who just came out with their budget last night, and the Youth Coordinating Board, and also Finance and Property Services.